Hi there, and you're watching an economic update on Asia with Tim Condon from ING in Singapore. So Tim, let's begin with China, as China's consumer inflation slowed more than expected in September to almost a 5-year low. Tim, are you expecting any stimulus measures as a result of this data?
Well, the slowdown was a little bit more than expected. Consensus was 1.7, actual was 1.6, so not that big of a disappointment. All of the slowdown is coming from the food component. That's been the story all year. Non-food inflation in China was steady at 1.6%, in line with the headline number, but the big source of disinflation in China is food. That really has nothing to do with macro policy. It's really just China's been blessed with good weather this year, and it had rather severe weather last year, so difference in from one year to another has translated into this disinflation pressure. I think that we'll get a couple more months of that. That's the seasonal pattern. October, November are low months for food component increases, and then we go into the December, January, February months when food prices tend to go up, and I suspect that means the bottom. We're very close to the bottom in the inflation prints in China. As far as what they'll do about it, I don't think they're that worried about it because of the factors that I've said. But what we have seen in the most recent number is a very big jump, unusually big, in the CPI education component. Now, the education component the education component is driven by education fees, and most of the fees go to teachers in the form of salaries. So teachers are civil servants, so there's a large fiscal policy element to this component of the consumer price index, and this year's sequential increase, 2% month on month, it's the biggest in 3 years, and I suspect that's a form of targeted easing. The message, I think, is that the government wants wages generally to go up a little bit more quickly than they have been, and teachers in particular to spend more money, and this seems consistent with the other kinds of policies the authorities have had in place this year, which are called in their terminology targeted measures. These are different than broad economy-wide measures, which the authorities have so far eschewed in favor of these more targeted approaches. They seem determined to wring out the excesses that creeped into the economy from the huge monetary stimulus in 2009, 2010, and they don't want to use broad-based measures or economy-wide measures for fear of rekindling those excesses, and are sticking with these targeted approaches. So maybe we saw an example of one in the September CPI data, but I don't think that there's a great deal to worry about. The authorities don't seem particularly worried that they're facing a deflation threat in China.
And moving over to Singapore, the central bank kept monetary policy steady despite the economy's sluggish growth. Tim, how concerned are you for Singapore's growth?
Well, the growth side of things, the growth in Singapore in the third quarter was a little bit weaker than expected, but I think some of that was coming from an unusually weak contribution from the construction industry. That I think is probably a one-off, and we'll get a bounce in the fourth quarter, and that allays my concern that there's any significant danger to the growth forecast. The authorities are looking for growth in this 2.5% to 3.5% range, and I think that's a very safe bet. We are at our forecast at ING is 3.2, and that's pretty much in line with what the rest of the world is looking for as well.
And finally, Tim, just one quick question on South Korea. The central bank today cut its interest rate for the second time in 3 months and lowered its economic growth estimate. Tim, do you think the bank will refrain from making any more cuts this year?
They rationalized or at least one of the rationales you could deduce for the rate cut by the Bank of Korea today was their downgrades of their GDP growth forecast. They cut their growth forecast and they slashed their inflation forecast. For example, the forecast for this year for consumer price inflation has been cut to 1.4% from 2.4%. So, and they cut next year's as well. So I think what that means is that these big downgrades raise the bar for the economic data to surprise sufficiently on the downside to warrant another rate cut this year. But next year is a different story, and the bar drops, I think, for 2015.
Tim, thank you very much for joining us on the show today. Well, viewers, do stay tuned. We have plenty more economic updates heading your way. Goodbye for now.